The Arctic Council is one of the most important, if not the most important organization in the Arctic. Focused on research, it prioritizes cooperation and sustainability between its member states, which can only belong if they have land in the Arctic. Since its founding in 1996, the sharing of data and technology has revealed critical findings about climate change, pollution, and much more. While there was the expected headbutting between some states, the Council generally functioned as planned. It was a model organization that other international bodies actually admired and tried to emulate. It seemed like cooperation trumped competition. In 2022, that changed.
Military operation is now underway in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine has declared a state of emergency.
In February of that year, Russia invaded Ukraine, which kicked off a still ongoing war. Russia's aggression prompted most of the world to condemn its actions and seize any type of economic or diplomatic cooperation. The Arctic Council was not immune. The other members of the Council unilaterally refused to participate with Russia. The Council's largest member, owning 45% of the Arctic coastline, was suddenly not a part of the Council. Research stalled or stopped completely. Data was no longer being collected. But the consequences of Russia's invasion and the Council's response go far beyond just the impact on Arctic research. The stability and security of the Arctic is now in question. So what happens now? To answer that, it's important to understand how the Council became so important in the first place. The Arctic is an isolated place. Only 4 million people, about 0.05% of the world's population, live there. It's also cold, very cold. Winter temperatures frequently dip below -50 degrees Celsius in the coldest areas. Agriculture is difficult, food can be scarce, and resources are usually imported from the south. So how do you govern a generally inhospitable space where none of your political leaders actually live? There are different ways to go about it. Many extract resources from it. Most treat their indigenous citizens poorly. For some, that's an understatement. The Arctic is a unique place that faces issues like no other region in the world. It makes it a unique testing ground for international cooperation and, in many cases, competition. This realization is what led the world's 8 Arctic states to create the Arctic Council in 1996 under the Ottawa Declaration. These states include Canada, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden, the United States, and Denmark representing Greenland. Interestingly, the Arctic Council is the only international organization that includes indigenous groups as equal members of their organization. So, in addition to the 8 countries, the Council includes 6 indigenous groups. The Council focuses primarily on research, sustainable development, and the protection of rights for those living in the Arctic. Its transnational research has become critical to understanding climate change since its effects are most profoundly felt in the far north in a process called Arctic amplification. The Arctic Council allows for American scientists to conduct studies on a Norwegian vessel in Russian waters, for example. The sharing of research revealed new insights and important data, from climate change to microplastics and marine food sources to indigenous teen suicide. At any given time, the Council has over 100 ongoing projects with a variety of stakeholders. Since 1996, the Arctic Council has grown from a relatively niche organization to one of significant prominence. While the Council began as a research-oriented group, it gradually took on more expansive matters like trade routes and maritime policy. Legally binding agreements that include search and rescue, oil spill responses, and scientific cooperation have all been catalyzed by the Arctic Council. Moreover, as the Arctic continues to thaw due to global warming, the economic and military opportunities are a Pandora's box for what each Arctic country seeks to gain in the region. More open water, more available land, and a growing understanding of the region began a trend toward 1. Realizing the importance of the Arctic, and 2. Viewing it from a security perspective. This explains why, recently, more countries have petitioned to become observer states to the Council due to their vested interests in the region, even if they do not have land in it. Japan, China, and various Western European powers have decided to keep an eye on the region and to make sure their interests are protected. This change from a relatively niche institution to one of critical importance hit a roadblock in 2014, following Russia's annexation of Crimea. Canada, the chair of the Council when it happened, proposed halting the Council in response to Russia's actions. The other members thought the decision was a bit too drastic and wanted their work to continue. But the cooperation had become tainted. Cooperation between the chiefs of Arctic Defense, which had just begun, ended, and Russia withdrew from the Arctic Security Forces Roundtable. In the years that followed, Russia began constructing various military bases in the Arctic and restored old Soviet ones. Russia began scaling up its military exercises in the far north, usually in response to NATO exercises in the region. Whether previously known or not, NATO quickly realized Russia's supremacy in the Arctic. According to various Arctic experts, it would take the West about a decade to catch up to Russia's primacy in the Arctic, if it even chose to do so. Fast forward to the present day, and the Council is stalled. To make matters worse, when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, it was in the middle of Russia's chairmanship of the Council. So, for a whole year, the Council was without a leader. In July of 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed to protect Arctic waters, quote, by all means. To put this into perspective, let's quickly recap the situation. Russia, the largest Arctic state and the preeminent military power in the region, is a decade ahead of the West in terms of securing and militarizing the far north. The main body for Arctic cooperation has sputtered, and now very little is holding Russia back if it chooses to do something drastic in the Arctic. About a month ago, Norway began its term as chair of the Council, which the Russian delegate surprisingly and easily passed off. The practical questions about how the Council could even function without its largest member are still being determined. As one Arctic scholar put it, there is no Arctic Council without Russia. Even more concerning, there are fears that pushing Russia too far away might antagonize it to completely remove itself from the Council. This would hurt any efforts to bring the Council back in full. Russia might even go a step further and disrupt or outright prevent any types of research around its borders. It might fully claim its trade routes and expel foreign ships apart from its allies. Adding to the dilemma, some of the permanent members have differing priorities from the other Arctic Council states. The Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North had a change of leadership and currently backs the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Sami Council and the Inuit Circumpolar Council both emphasize the need for unity and do not condemn the Russian military action in Ukraine. This has some very practical problems for the Council. First of all, the Council can do very little without Russia, its biggest geographic member. Secondly, if the indigenous permanent members generally want Russia to be included for the sake of research and cooperation, then the Council cannot accomplish much without their approval. This leaves the Council in a stalemate. Scholars and officials alike generally agree that if the Council wants to survive into the future, it must once more include Russia. This is not to say that excluding Russia was right or wrong. It definitely seemed like the right decision then. It could use some creative ways to work around Russia's absence, but that path is full of obstacles and risks antagonizing Russia. So, the Council cannot exist without Russia. How does it proceed from here? Well, firstly, the Arctic Council should serve as a point of common interest that guarantees cooperation despite other geopolitical issues. It should be common ground that persists during heightened tensions, and, in hopeful cases, it might be the venue for bringing opposing states back together. Part of the reason the Arctic Council was previously so good at this was the fact that it is not a legally binding institution. Rather than create international laws or treaties countries must abide by, the Council instead promoted communication and research. Originally, some people may have seen this as a weakness, but now it might be a strength. The non-confrontational and cooperative approach, without legal attachment, should be appealing to opposing states. Of any international forum, it's one Russia would be most likely to rejoin. Norway is the current chair, and it has a delicate path ahead. It must balance revitalizing the Council without Russia while simultaneously trying to bring it back into the fold. Russia is necessary for the Council to exist. In the words of Martin Hogland, a senior Arctic official for Norway, quote, "We want to make the Council relevant again. We're not here ringing a bell to say we're back, we're focused on taking it step by step. If cooperation breaks down completely, it will be so much harder to rebuild it from scratch."